Most missions we were on were ground support. On the first day, we were supposed to attack the Politz work in Albiers. It was quite normal for an aircraft factory like the Politz work to be protected, and not just with anti-aircraft guns, but with fighter planes as well.
Nun war für sich ja ganz natürlich, dass so ein Flugzeug
In our group, we had 14 aircraft ready to embark on the mission.
In dem Raum war nicht nur die französische Jagdwaffe, sondern auch noch die englische Jagdwaffe. Wir hatten noch 14 Maschinen für den Einsatz.
We set out to the Politz works without any sort of fighter escort. The result of having no escort was that only one aircraft came back, and that one had a dead man on board.
Ron Huggins and the 1st Armoured Division were also behind the front line and attempting a counter-attack.
I got myself into a situation where I was supporting another cruiser tank like this. It was commanded by one of our officers. He was the first tank to get hit. The type of weapon that did the damage was one of these 4-barrel German anti-aircraft guns. These 4 projectiles passed so close across my front to hit this other tank that I could feel the displacement of air. It was as close as that. It set the tank on fire. 2 men were killed inside the tank outright. The officer commander and the driver managed to scramble out, but they were both wounded. I had to get them away from the spot because this tank that was on fire was likely to blow up and it was full of ammunition. Looking round quickly, I spotted a French farm across a field. So the officer scrambled on my tank. He jumped on very quickly and got round the front of the tank here, in front of the turret. He sat down on there. And we got moving, or he told me to get moving, and the poor driver, his driver, hung on to the towing eye at the back of the tank and waved me on, and we virtually towed him across the field through the grass. When we got there, I could see there was a gateway leading into this farmyard, but I didn't realise at the time that most French farmyards are built in a kind of square. Once you go in, you have to come back out the same way. So we nosed our way in and then realised we couldn't get out, so it meant reversing. And you can imagine what happened then. We couldn't get reverse gear. Before we could do anything else, there was a terrific bang in the back of the tank. We'd been hit in the engine and the petrol tank at the back, we caught fire. Well, only thing we could do then was to bail out of it. And over in a corner of the field, we spotted 1 or 2 more of our tanks and men who seemed to be mustering there. So we ran over to it, and that's what it. The survivors were being called to a muster by the commanding officer and so forth.
By the 13th of May, France was facing total collapse. German invasion forces had crossed the River Meuse, effectively cutting the Allies off, and, realistically speaking, the battle for France was lost. The Allies were now facing German forces advancing from north and south, and were being driven back towards the Channel. The retreat had begun. By the 20th of May, 2 weeks after the invasion of France, the Germans had rounded up the Allied forces retreating towards the coast. Charlie Brown of the 50th Regiment had been delivering petrol to an outpost. In the chaos of the retreat, he slept through the call to muster and woke to find only one other person left.
The red-capped sergeant just starting up his motorbike. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, my company was over there under the... Oh, he said, they've been gone a long time. He said, everybody's gone and I'm just going, I'm the last one. He said, turn round and get out of here, because he said, Jerry's only about a mile away. Well, I was lost for 36 hours. After 36 hours, I spotted 3 lorries with 5th Div's sign, which was a Y. Hurriedly turned round in a gateway and called them up.
On the 27th of May 1940, the defeated Belgian army surrendered to the Germans. General Gort, commander of the BEF, reckoned that the French were incapable of any kind of counterattack, yet he was determined to save his own army. 463,000 Allied troops were now heading for the Channel, but they weren't the only ones retreating before the might of the German invasion force. Alongside them were columns of refugees fleeing from Belgium, France and Holland.
The most pathetic thing for me was the refugees, and thousands of them.
Cars were following one after another. There were huge traffic jams. People marched past on foot. There were even people in horse-drawn carriages carrying furniture, old carts laden with trunks. And in the midst of everything, there were soldiers. They too were fleeing.
Myself and some of my friends, we were all together about 4 or 5. We immediately started to go towards Dunkirk. Why Dunkirk? For the only reason because we saw actually a lot of soldiers, English soldiers, actually going towards that place. And therefore we thought that is the only safest way to go to, and that is towards England.
Along with the celebrated little ships, nearly 900 volunteer civilian craft, was a British, Dutch, French and Belgian naval fleet of over 40 destroyers and many smaller vessels. All were prepared to cross the Channel, many repeatedly, to pluck Allied troops to safety from the French coast. Anthony Goodhart was a young lieutenant in the Royal Navy.
Going over to Dunkirk from Dover was quite straightforward. We went over in a destroyer to Dunkirk. About a dozen of us were told that we were to be beach masters along the beach.
There wasn't enough space on the rescue vessels for all the men trapped on the Dunkirk beaches. Of the 463,000, the Royal Navy wasn't expecting to be able to rescue more than 10%, and there certainly wasn't room for any armaments. Determined not to help the enemy in any way, the BEF did their best to disable their abandoned weapons.
We had to ditch our lorries in the canal. If there were no water about, they had to smash up the heads with a sledgehammer, so they weren't usable. The artillery had to take the breeches out of their guns, the breech blocks, and everybody had to make their guns, not our rifles, unusable.
Ted Wicks was on board one of the rescue ships.
A petty officer came up to me and he said, would you like a tot of rum? And I said, well, no. I said, I don't drink, I don't take the rum. He said, I think where you're going, he said, you're going to need it. So I had my tot of rum, just as well I did, because when we got over there, we went onto the beach in the destroyer's boat, but the shelving there was very, 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 very shallow. So, in fact, the destroyer had to anchor off at least a mile.
We were told to spread ourselves out along the beach. But I was the most junior officer. I had to go the furthest. And I had to walk, I think it must have been about 12 miles, to a place called La Panne, which in fact is in Belgium.